Hi, welcome to the language review for TABE. My name is Dana Davidson. I'm the Associate Director of the Academic Support Center at Daytona State College. I, along with my coworker Greg Stone, have put together this presentation for you to help you review for the subtest. The first subject we're going to look at is subject-verb agreement. Errors in subject-verb agreement often occur when other words in the sentence separate the subject and the verb. To help recognize these errors, read the sentence without the interrupting words. Here are some examples. The president of the club, as well as other officers, feel that the membership dues need to be raised. Now the question is, feel the correct verb to use. The key to finding this out is isolating the simple subject and the simple verb by getting rid of the words that come in between. So our simple subject is president, and we get rid of everything in between. When we do that, we can hear it with our ear that feel is not correct. The president feel that the membership dues need to be raised doesn't sound right. We can hear it when we delete these words that it should be feels. The president feels that the membership dues need to be raised. Now, like it or not, sometimes test makers will try to trick us. The word that they put in front of it, officers, is put there to trick us because officers feel that the membership dues need to be raised sounds correct to us. Another example, the class, including all of the teacher's lectures and slideshows, are boring. Notice again the word here, slideshows are boring. That sounds correct. But remember, you need to look at the simple subject, which is class, get rid of everything else, and we can hear that the class is boring is the correct choice. Let's continue with subject-verb agreement. Two singular subjects connected by or, either or neither nor require a singular verb. Let's look at this example. My aunt or my uncle is arriving by train today. Only one of them is arriving, correct? So we need a singular verb is. This one's trickier. If one subject is singular and one is plural, the verb agrees with the noun or pronoun closest to it. These two sentences look almost identical, except that the order of the subjects is reversed. Here we've got plates first, serving bowl second. Here we've got serving bowl first, plate second. The key is to take the thing that's closest to the verb and make it agree. So here we've got the serving bowl goes on that shelf. And here we have the plates go on that shelf. Certain words, when they're used as the subject of a sentence, always require a singular verb. Some of these words are each, either, neither, everyone, and everybody. Again, keep in mind, sometimes test makers will try to trick you. If we look at this sentence, many people think that hot dogs is the subject of this sentence. So they'll say to themselves, hot dogs is juicy. Well, that definitely sounds incorrect, right? What you have to realize, though, is that each is actually the subject of the sentence. So each is juicy. And if it helps you, add the word one in there when you read it out loud to yourself. Each one is juicy. And it helps you see that it's definitely taking a singular verb. Okay, let's talk about parallel structure. What does that mean? The ideas in sentences should be parallel, meaning they should be expressed in the same way. This is a little bit of a nebulous definition, so let's take a look at some examples. Which sentence is correct? Sarah's actions were heroic and to be praised. Or Sarah's actions were heroic and praiseworthy. First, let's ask ourselves, what's the difference between these two sentences? And it looks like it's at the end, to be praised or praiseworthy. Now, what they're looking for here is that the words kind of match in a sense. Heroic and to be praised, or heroic and praiseworthy. Now, heroic's an adjective, praiseworthy is an adjective. These two match. The thing that they're looking for here is that when you add in this to be, it throws off your parallel structure. Let's look at another example. Take a second, read those sentences, and when you do, you'll find that the only difference, again, is at the end. Lacked motivation, and his motivation was low. So in parallel structure, again, they want things in the sentence to be equal or parallel to each other. So in this instance, when you have things in a list, what you usually want to look for is the ending of the verb. So he waited, completed, and lacked. And then here we've got waited, completed, and his motivation was low. Here the pattern breaks, right? So the first example here is the correct one because they're looking at the endings of the verbs in this case. Misplaced or dangling modifiers. A modifier is a word or phrase that adds detail or description to a sentence. To avoid confusion, modifiers should be placed near the words they modify. Let's look at some examples. Which sentence is correct? Driving through the woods, the photographer saw several black bears. Or, the photographer saw several black bears driving through the woods. Did that last sentence make you smile a little? Because actually, in the second sentence, bears are driving. So that is incorrect because the word that's doing the action should be right next to the verb. So the first one's actually correct because it is the photographer who's driving, right? So photographer is closest to the word driving here, whereas bears is closest to the word driving in the second one. Let's look at another example. While looking for the vandals, a burglary that had not been reported was discovered by the police. Or, while looking for the vandals, the police found evidence of a burglary that had not been reported. Who is looking for vandals? The police, right? Police here is closest to the looking. Here, police is all the way at the end of the sentence and looking is at the beginning. So in this case, the first one is incorrect and the second one is correct. Clear pronoun reference. When a writer uses a pronoun, it should be clear to the reader what the antecedent, which is the noun it refers to, for the pronoun is. What's the problem with this sentence? My mother removed the roses from the 2 vases and threw them in the trash. Now, logically, we would think she probably isn't throwing the vases in the trash, right? But if we're looking at just the sentence, it's not clear what the word them here refers to. Is it the roses or is it the vases? So what we want to do is actually, in that case, be clear. Put a noun there instead. So my mother removed the roses from the 2 vases and threw the flowers in the trash. Here's another example. The candy dish was empty, but we were tired of eating it anyway. The candy dish was empty, but we were tired of eating candy anyway. Now again, logic sets in. We probably were not eating a candy dish, right? But in this sentence, it's what it sounds like, right? We were tired of eating it, which is the candy dish. So for clear pronoun reference, in this case, we want to put the actual noun, which is candy there. Pronoun case, subject versus object. To figure out which pronoun you should use, you want to figure out if it's the subject of a sentence or the object. Subject pronouns are those pronouns that perform action. They include I, you, he, she, we, they, who, and whoever. Object pronouns are pronouns that receive action. They include me, you, him, her, us, them, whom, and whomever. So which of these is correct? She gave Jim and me extra cookies, or she gave Jim and I extra cookies. Now, if we look up at our subjects and our objects, we have to ask ourselves, what's happening in this sentence? She is the person doing something, so she's the subject pronoun, right? Jim and either me or I are receiving something. We're receiving action, right? So, which one's an object pronoun, I or me? It's me, correct? So, based on this, we can see that it should be she gave Jim and me extra cookies. There's also a little trick to this, and it's to get rid of Jim and see what sounds right. She gave me extra cookies, or she gave I extra cookies. When we get rid of Jim, it's a lot easier to hear that it should be she gave me extra cookies. A fragment is a group of words that looks like a sentence but really isn't. So basically it's a group of words with a period at the end but isn't really a sentence. To be a sentence, groups of words need to have at least one independent clause. That means it must have a subject, verb, and express a complete thought. Sometimes these are harder to pick out though than we think. So these two examples are actually fragments. So notice in the first one, you think, okay, toys is the subject, thrown is the verb, and everywhere makes it complete. But it is missing part of the verb. It needs that helping verb, like toys of all kinds were thrown everywhere or are thrown everywhere. It needs that extra to make it complete. Looking at the second example, notice that it's long. Test makers will do this as well. They'll give you a long example because most people think that would be a complete sentence. But this is actually missing a subject, right? Who's running? And it's also missing part of the verb. So to make this complete, we would need to add something like Sarah was running so quickly that she ran out of breath and collapsed. Fragments are frequently dependent clauses. Dependent, notice that we talked about independent already. Dependent clauses that follow a main clause. Dependent clauses begin with words called subordinate conjunctions, words like such as, since, because, while, which, and although. That's just some of them. So let's look at this example. Where's the fragment and how can it be fixed? The county's current policy on housing is incomplete as it stands, which is why we believe the proposed amendment should be passed. First sentence is actually an independent clause. It's got everything it needs to be its own sentence. However, the second sentence, what does it start with? It starts with which is one of these subordinate conjunctions, right? Which is why we believe the proposed amendment should be passed. Again, it's long, but since it starts with which, it's dependent on something else to make it complete. So it should not be punctuated like it is. It shouldn't have that period. One way we could fix it would be to make this period a comma and make this a lowercase w, and we're going to put them together into one sentence. In the previous slide, I mentioned some of the subordinate conjunctions. I wanted to give you a list here that you can go back and review again before your test. It's more a complete list of the subordinate conjunctions. So when you see something that begins with one of these, just keep in mind that that might be a sentence fragment. Comma splices and run-on sentences. A comma splice occurs when two independent clauses are connected by only a comma. An example is, your first geometry test is tomorrow, you better study. That is not correct. How can we fix it? One way we can fix it is to add a coordinating conjunction. If you think of the acronym fanboys, it'll help you to remember what those words are. For, and, nor, but, yet, or yet so. Now, if we put one of those words between it and notice that it's preceded by a comma, you always put a comma before a coordinating conjunction, then it is correct. A second way to fix it is to add a subordinate conjunction. Remember we just talked about those. So we're going to choose a word like since. Since your first geometry test is tomorrow, comma, you better study. Now that is dependent on the second part and it makes it a complete sentence. Another way to fix it is to add a semicolon instead of the comma. Sometimes when they add the semicolon, they'll also add a word called a conjunctive adverb. It's something like however, also, otherwise, consequently, or therefore. So notice your first geometry test is tomorrow, semicolon, therefore, comma, you better study. Don't forget that comma. A run-on sentence is basically the same as a comma splice, except there's no punctuation at all. It's just two independent clauses connected with nothing in between. So it's your first geometry test is tomorrow, you better study. There's just nothing there. But the way you fix this is exactly the same as the ways listed above. In the previous slide, I pointed out some instances where you would want to use a comma. Now we're going to add a few more comma rules. You want to use a comma to separate items in a list, 3 or more. After an interrupter, teachers do, in fact, change lives. Notice the commas are on both sides of the interrupter, in fact. After yes or no at the beginning of a sentence. With a direct address, that means you're calling somebody by name. This is partially your fault, Jane. And between two adjectives when the order does not matter. I was a stubborn, difficult patient. When you can add and instead of the comma, that's also a clue that you need it. I was a stubborn and difficult patient. Lets you know that you would need a comma there. Okay, let's talk about quotation marks. Take note of the following. There is a comma after the introductory element, right? That's another comma rule. Additionally, the actual quote begins with a capital letter right here. So even though Mr. is capitalized, that's the beginning of the sentence, this is the actual beginning of the quote, so we want to capitalize that T. And then also the end punctuation mark is inside. It's inside this quote, not on the outside. Notice that when the quote is interrupted, commas set off the interruption. Hopefully, comma, Cindy continued, comma, at least one of the companies I applied to will call me in for an interview. So what we're pointing out is here, the quote starts, but then this Cindy continued part interrupts it. So we want to make sure we have a comma here and a comma there as well. And you want to use a colon to introduce a quotation after an independent clause. Here's an example. Before the game, Coach Stone reminded us of his motto, go big or go home. This whole part here is an independent clause, which means it could stand on its own as a sentence, right? So we need a colon there. Up here, the introductory part, Mr. Johnson said, isn't an independent clause. It could not stand on its own as its own sentence. So that one just needs a comma. Quotes that are questions can be tricky. Sometimes the question mark goes on the inside of the quotation mark, and sometimes it goes on the outside. So let's look at the difference. A question mark goes inside the quotation mark when the quote itself is a question. Beth asked, "May I have a bite of your sandwich?" The quote is actually a question. May I have a bite of your sandwich? When that's the case, the question mark goes inside the quote. Now let's look at the opposite. However, if the entire sentence is a question, then the question mark goes outside. Did he just say, "I don't care what you think"? The whole entire thing is a question this time. What's inside the quote itself is not the question. I don't care what you think. That's not a question, right? But did he just say? That's the question. So the question mark goes on the outside of the quote in that instance. If words are omitted from the quotation, you're going to use ellipsis marks, which are the 3 dots, in place of words that are omitted. Be sure that when you omit words, it doesn't change the overall meaning of the passage. The poster says, "Looking for a new job? Make plans to attend DSC's job fair on May 5th, 2022. Bring several copies of your resume." So in this case, other details of the poster have been deleted. Right here, that ellipsis tells us something's been deleted, right? But the part that was deleted doesn't change the overall meaning. We still get the overall meaning of what that means. On the TABE, sometimes it's going to ask you the definitions of certain words. Well, if you're not familiar with the word, there are ways that you can use the context of the sentence or paragraph to figure it out. Common types of context clues are examples. So this is when an example is within the sentence and it helps you figure out the meaning. The adverse effects of the drug, including dizziness, nausea, and headaches, have caused it to be withdrawn from the market. Now, if you were asked to say, what does adverse mean, and you don't already know, you're going to look to these examples: dizziness, nausea, headaches. Those are all unpleasant things, right? So we know that it's unpleasant, or it's bad, or it's negative. So you're going to look for something like that in your answer choices, because that's what adverse means. Synonyms. Sometimes there's a word within the sentence that has a similar meaning. So in this example, because my friends had advised me to scrutinize the lease, I took time to examine all the fine print. If I don't know what scrutinize means, I've got a synonym right here, examine. And sometimes you'll even get lucky enough that they'll make examine be one of your answer choices. Not always, but once in a while you'll look out. Antonyms are the opposite meaning, right? Many people have pointed out the harmful effects that a working mother may have on her family, yet there are many salutary effects as well. If I don't know what this word means, I know that this word yet means that what came before it was the opposite. So harmful effects are the opposite. So I'm going to look for something in my word choices that's the opposite of harmful. And then just other clues, anything else in that sentence that might help you figure out the meaning of the word. And an example could be, the car wash we organized was a fiasco. It rained all day. If you don't know what fiasco means, raining all day at a car wash, we know would not be a good thing, right? So you're going to look for something that's not a good thing in your choices, right? Something that means something similar to that would be a good. There are 4 types of sentences. A simple sentence is just one independent clause: subject, verb, complete thought. The cat ate from its food bowl. A compound sentence has 2 or more independent clauses, but no dependent clauses. Now, if you need a refresher again on independent and dependent, go back to those slides in the presentation where we discussed that. So, first one, my friends had advised me to scrutinize the lease. I took time to examine all the fine print. Now, remember, we talked about a semicolon is a way that you can connect two independent clauses, right? Joe chose the red toy, but Jordan wanted the green one. Remember, another way we already talked about combining two independent clauses was a conjunction, but, and remember it has to have that comma in front of it. The third type of sentence is called a complex sentence. It's one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. First example, when I study hard, remember that word, when I study hard, that's dependent, followed by a comma, I receive better grades. So first we have the dependent, then we have the independent clause, right? Second example, I receive better grades when I study hard. I receive better grades, that could stand on its own as a sentence, right? That's the independent. When I study hard, all we did is reverse the order of these two, right? And it's an independent and a dependent now. And the last one is called compound complex. That's two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clause. Here are some examples. We were all thrilled when we arrived at the beach. The waves were perfect. We were all thrilled. That can stand on its own. Independent. When we arrived at the beach, remember that when makes it dependent. Then we got a semicolon and we've got another independent clause here. Second example, when Fred reaches home, he trips on the sidewalk and he realizes he has locked his keys in the car. Not a good day for Fred. So when Fred reaches home, dependent. He trips on the sidewalk, independent, and he realizes he has locked his keys in the car. That's another independent. Now the TABE will actually ask you questions like, out of these four choices, what is a compound complex sentence? So this is just going to take a little bit of memorizing on your part to know what all of these mean. It could ask you which one's a compound sentence, which one's complex. So you need to know these definitions before you go into the test so you'll be able to recognize those. Active and passive voice. Verbs have two voices, active and passive. When the subject performs the action, or it does something, it's an active voice. When the subject receives the action or something is done to it, the verb is in passive. All right, so let's look at some examples. My chickens were harassed by a coyote versus a coyote harassed my chickens. Now, the coyote's what's doing something, right? The coyote harassed my chickens. It's active. There's the actor, the coyote, the verb harassed, and what did he act on? The chickens. So this is active. In this one, my chickens were harassed by a coyote. This is passive voice. There's the thing that's acted upon, which is the chickens. They were harassed by the coyote, who is the actor. Let's look at another example. The chemistry quiz was passed by only 13% of the students, as opposed to only 13% of the students passed the chemistry quiz. One is active, one is passive. Here, the students are doing something. They passed the chemistry quiz. It's active. Here, the chemistry quiz was passed by only 13% of the students. In this sentence, it seems like the students aren't actively involved, right? So it's passive. The TABE test will often ask you to identify out of 4 sentences which one is passive, or out of the 4, which 3 are passive and which 1 is active. The English language has 5 grammatical moods. Those are indicative. This is a sentence that expresses a fact, like he likes college football. Imperative, which expresses a command, like put your dishes in the dishwasher. Interrogative asks a question, such as, is Scooby-Doo appropriate for children? Conditional states a condition that must be present for something else to happen, such as, if I vacationed in Venice, I would definitely ride in a canal boat. The last one is subjunctive. This can be making a suggestion, making a wish, or expressing something that is contrary to fact. I wish my dog would play fetch. This is a wish. Tom suggested that Tina take Friday off. A suggestion. Diane acts as if she were the smartest person in the room, something that is contrary to fact. Word choice, tone, and style. Word choice is the language you use to express your ideas. This will affect your style and your tone. Tone reveals how the writer feels or thinks about a topic. It can be serious or humorous, logical or emotional, objective or subjective. Style is the way you use language to express your ideas. There are 2 basic types of style. There's an informal style, which is appropriate for messages to people you know well and may include casual language and non-standard punctuation. Think of texting. An example, hey bro, stop by my place this Tuesday about 10 for a party. A formal style is appropriate for all other types of writing. You will want to use a serious, objective tone, as well as standard punctuation and spelling. Avoid using contractions or slang. You are invited to a party at my residence on Tuesday, May 10th at 10 p.m. Topic sentences. This subject will also be discussed in the reading section, but the language section also will ask you at points to fill in the blank about a topic sentence or choose from a list of which is the best topic sentence. The topic sentence presents the topic or main idea of a paragraph or text. The topic sentence of an informative text should clearly identify the main topic. Based on this sentence, readers should know what they will be learning about in the text. An example is, homeowners should consider many factors when deciding to refinance their mortgages. The topic sentence of an argumentative text should make a strong, precise claim, which is an opinion or a viewpoint. Readers should know what point of view or action the author supports. A good topic sentence would be, since college athletic teams bring in large amount of money for their institutions, college players should be compensated. Sometimes the word counterclaim is used in a question on the TABE language. So just so you know, a counterclaim is often included in the body of an argumentative text. A counterclaim shows the opposing viewpoint of the claim. So if ever asked to identify a counterclaim, keep in mind that it's something that is the opposite viewpoint of what the person is arguing for. Sometimes the TABE language will give a paragraph and ask you to choose what would be the best transition word to use between certain sentences. So I have given a list here of some popular transition words and what they're used for. So it is divided into comparing, contrasting, showing cause and effect, giving examples, and showing sequence or time. You should take some time to review this slide and familiarize yourself with the different transition words that are used in each case. Unfortunately, the TABE does include spelling. I say unfortunately because in today's age, we all sometimes depend on spell check when we're writing. Unfortunately, there is no spell check when we're taking this test. Also, unfortunately, spelling is something that's a little too lengthy to go over in a short presentation. So what we've done is given you some links. If you feel spelling is a weakness, take some time to go into these links and look over some commonly misspelled words and also some tips for common spelling rules. Now that we've looked at the topics that will be covered on the TABE, let's practice some actual questions. For this section, I encourage you to pause the presentation, thoroughly read the question, and jot down what you think the answer is. Then hit play again and go along with me to see what the answer is. Which sentence is correctly punctuated? So what I want to do first is kind of scan all of my answer choices. And in this case, I can see the sentence is basically exactly the same for every choice. The only difference is the placement of my commas. So now I need to call back on my comma rules and see which ones are correctly used here. So when you broke your promise, dependent clause, comma, I was extremely upset. I hope that I will be able to trust you in the future. Anybody remember what this is called? Comma splice, right? That is not correct. B, when you broke your promise, I was extremely upset. All right, no commas at all in here. I already know I needed one after that introductory clause there, so that's incorrect. When you broke your promise, I was extremely upset. I hope that I will be able to trust you in the future. This one looks correct, but always read all of your answer choices before you mark an answer. When you broke your promise, I was extremely upset. Again, this is missing that comma after that introductory phrase. So our answer is C. Which sentence is written correctly? If you haven't already done so, pause it now and read over all your selections. With these, it's a little bit difficult because they're not telling you exactly what they're looking for. You have to figure it out. So hopefully by reading your selections, you kind of thought back to the misplaced and dangling modifiers conversation we had earlier. Let's look at answer A. Rushing to finish the surprise dinner on time, Melissa borrowed an egg from a neighbor that was rotten. Okay, neighbor, rotten. The neighbor's not rotten, the egg is, right? So this is misplaced, so A is correct. Incorrect, sorry. B, Melissa borrowed an egg from a neighbor that was rotten. Again, the neighbor is rotten, not correct. Melissa borrowed an egg that was rotten from a neighbor. Okay, sounds better. Rushing to finish the surprise dinner on time. What's the problem here? Who's rushing? Not the neighbor. Melissa's the one rushing, right? So that's not correct. So let's hope D is. Rushing to finish the surprise dinner on time, Melissa borrowed an egg that was rotten from a neighbor. D makes everything work, so that's the correct answer. Which sentence is written correctly? Again, I'm not sure exactly what they're looking for, so I'm going to read all of my options, trying to rule out any that I believe are incorrect. The Akal Tiki horse breed, and honestly, I do not know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, originally from Turkmenistan, have long enjoyed a reputation for bravery and fortitude. All right, so I have to figure out what they're looking for. My interrupter phrase is correct. It's got commas on both sides. So I'm wondering if it's maybe subject-verb agreement. The horse breed, singular, I'm going to get rid of everything else, have long been. No, because have is plural, breed is singular. So this one's incorrect because that should be has. All right, let's go to B. The employer decided that he could not, due to the high cost of health care, afford to offer other benefits to his employees. All right, my interrupter is set off by commas. Let's see if my subject-verb agreement's correct. The employer decided, okay, he could not afford to offer. This one sounded okay to me, but on any test, I don't want to just mark it without reading the rest of them. So let's go on. Leading the tour of the museum today is Mary and Jacob. Well, this one's a little bit weird because usually my subjects come first, but I have two subjects, right? Mary and Jacob. So it should be plural. Mary and Jacob are leading the tour. Notice how I rearranged the order of that sentence where it had subject verb first so I could better hear it in my head. So this should be are, so that's incorrect. Each of the storm chasers decide whether or not to go out when rain makes visibility low. Now remember, each, when I see that, it's the subject of the sentence and it's always what? Singular. So I get rid of what's in between. Each decides whether. All right, so that's incorrect. So I go back to the original one that I thought was correct, which was B. What is the meaning of insolent in the following sentence? The student's insolent behavior drove the teacher to punish the class with extra homework. Now, if you already know what insolent means, you're golden, right? But if you don't, let's see how we could figure it out. This insolent behavior is something that drove the teacher to punish the class. So I'm thinking if they're getting punished, insolent behavior is something negative in some way. It's not confusing. It could be disrespectful, right? That would make a teacher maybe want to punish the class. It definitely wouldn't be delightful. The student's unlikely behavior, that one doesn't really make sense. So I think my best bet is disrespectful, because disrespectful behavior is something that might lead the teacher to punish the class. So I'm going to guess B. Okay, for something a little longer like this, I'm going to scan it first and see what my directions are. It's wanting me first to read this sentence, and then it's wanting me to know which context clues help readers understand the meaning of functions. Okay, now that I know what it's asking me, I'm going to go back and read the sentence. Today's small, sophisticated drones are used by companies and individuals for different functions, such as filming events and searching for missing people. All right, now which of these might help me know what functions mean if I didn't already know? Small, sophisticated drones. I don't think that helps me because that's just the subject of the sentence. Used by companies and individuals. I actually don't think that helps me either figure out what functions mean. Filming events and searching for missing people. Now I do think this helps me. A clue here is the such as. It's giving me an example, such as filming events and searching for missing people. I think this is the answer, because it gives me such as, and it's an example of functions. But I'm going to keep going and looking at my last option just to be sure. Different functions. Well, that doesn't help me. That's only describing functions. So I'm going to go with C as my answer. Which of these sentences is punctuated correctly? Okay, scanning it, it looks like it's pretty much the same sentence, but I just have different punctuation in there. Thomas knew he would be punished for missing his curfew. He did it anyway. No punctuation at all in there, and I can already tell that I need something, right? I've got a independent clause here. Thomas knew he would be punished for missing his curfew. He did it anyway. Those each could stand on their own as sentences, so I need some kind of punctuation. Thomas knew he would be punished for missing his curfew, semicolon, he did it anyway. Now I remember that semicolons are a proper punctuation to use between two independent clauses, so I'm pretty sure B is the answer, but I'm going to keep reading anyway just to be sure. Thomas knew he would be punished for missing his curfew, and he did it anyway. Well, this would be correct if it had a comma right here, right? Because I remember if it has a coordinating conjunction, the fanboys, it needs a comma, so that's not right. Thomas knew he would be punishing for missing curfew, but he did it anyway. Same scenario as C. But is one of the fanboys words, so it needs a comma. So B is my correct choice. Which sentence uses passive voice? Tony and Katie made reservations at Ron's Steakhouse for dinner. Okay, in this one, Tony and Katie are doing something. They're actively doing something. So that is active, not passive. Tony picked up Katie at her apartment about 20 minutes before the reservation. Tony's doing something. He's active, so that's active. At dinner, Tony ate ribeye steak while Katie chose filet. Again, Tony's doing something, Katie's doing something, so we only have one choice left. Let's read that one. Afterwards, a piece of key lime pie was devoured by Tony and Katie. This one's passive. If it was active, it would have said Tony and Katie devoured a piece of key lime pie. So the answer to this one is D. In which sentence are commas used correctly? If I scan these sentences quickly, I can see all the words are exactly the same. It's just the placement of the commas I'm concerned about. So I'm going to look at them in order here. The bowling alley owner, who is a close friend, decided to close his business after 20 years. Who is a close friend is an interrupter. Remember we talked about interrupters? So it needs to have a comma on both sides of the interrupter, and this one only has this after. So that's not correct. This one does have the comma on both sides of the interrupter. So right away I'm thinking B is the answer. But when you take a test, you always want to read all your choices before you fill in that answer. Here we have a comma before but not after. And in D, there are no commas at all. So our answer actually is B for this one. Which sentence is written in the imperative mood? And if we remember our definitions, imperative mood means expressing a command. A, is dinner ready? No, that's a question, which would be interrogative. B, leave the food on the counter. That is a command, so I'm pretty sure it's B, but let's read the rest to be sure. If I cook dinner, we can all watch a movie after. That is conditional. And D, I wish that I were a chef. That one is subjunctive, so our answer is indeed B. Which of these is an example of a compound complex sentence? Now remember I mentioned you would have to memorize the forms for these. There's no way around it, unfortunately. So we had to remember that a compound complex sentence is two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. So let's look at what we've got. Jimmy got excellent grades. That's just a plain simple sentence. It's one independent clause. Because Jimmy got excellent grades, here is that subordinating conjunction, so that's dependent. He earned an academic scholarship. So we've got one dependent, one independent. So that is not our answer. Because Jimmy got excellent grades, dependent here, dependent. He earned an academic scholarship, independent, and he went to college, independent. So this looks like it checks off all my boxes. It's got 2 or more independent clauses and at least 1 dependent. So I think it's C, but let's look at the last one. Jimmy got excellent grades, independent, and he deserved them, independent. So my answer is C for this one. Which of the following sentences is punctuated correctly? So it looks like they're dealing with quotations here. So think back to our lessons on quotation marks and let's take a look. Grady asked Abe, comma, did you know that an earthquake and a tsunami hit Messina, Italy in 1908? Right away here I can tell something's wrong because this is supposed to be a quote, a direct quote, and it has those single quotation marks. So this isn't a quote within a quote, right? So we don't need single quotation marks, so I know that one's wrong. Grady asked Abe, comma, my comma's in the right spot. I've got double quotation marks here. So let's look at where the question mark's placed. Grady asked Abe, did you know that an earthquake and a tsunami hit Messina, Italy in 1908? The part that's a question is the part inside the quotes. And if you remember, if the part that's a question is inside the quotes, then the question mark should go inside the quotes too. So that one's not correct. And here we look like we've got exactly the same thing as B, except this. So I think C is correct because we've got the question mark inside the quotes. Let's look at the last one to be sure. And we got something funky going on here. We've got the quote with the single quote mark next to it. That's not right. So C is our answer. In which sentence are commas used correctly? So let's take a look. Sharon, will you be able to make appetizers or would you prefer to bring dessert? All right, remember direct address, Sharon, so that is correct. You want a comma after Sharon. Will you be able to make appetizers or would you prefer to bring dessert? Here's one of those fanboys words, 2 independent clauses, coordinating conjunction. We need a comma, that doesn't have it. Here, everything's the same so far. We do have a comma, but note it's in the wrong spot. It should be in front of the or, right? Everything's the same so far. We do have that comma. It's looking like C is correct. Let's just double check D. Well, D doesn't have any commas at all, so I do know that my correct answer in this case is C. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to read the directions first. I know that I'm needing to read the paragraph and then I know I'm going to be finding which word would best fit in the blank. Once I know what I'm supposed to be doing, then I'll go back and read the paragraph. Finding the time to volunteer can be challenging for most people. Blank. Many volunteers agree that the rewards far outweigh the challenges. The benefits include a great sense of accomplishment and personal satisfaction. So it looks like it's asking me what's the best transition word that I could use. Finding the time to volunteer can be challenging. And then the next sentence, though, says many volunteers agree rewards far outweigh the challenges. So it's saying something that's kind of the opposite, right? The opposite of challenging. So which one of these kind of means the opposite? Therefore, no, because therefore means it's if this is happening, then this would happen. Consequently and therefore are almost the same. Additionally is not correct. The only one that means kind of the opposite would be nevertheless. So D is our correct answer. Again, when I have a question that's a little longer like this, I'm going to read my directions first. It's asking me to read the paragraph and then pick which topic sentence would fit best in the blank. So now that I know what I'm being asked, I'll go back and read the paragraph. Blank. The state should not condone gambling and the possible illegal activities that go along with it. Using gambling revenues to fund schools sends the wrong message to students. Education should be funded out of taxpayer money instead of lottery revenues. So I'm going to get an idea of what I think the person's view is here, is that they are against using lottery money, right, for education. I got that in my mind already before I'm even looking at my answer. So my topic sentence, remember, this sounds like an argumentative. They have an argument they're trying to make. And we're supposed to be able to tell from the topic sentence in an argumentative essay what is the person's position. Gambling can be addictive, so counseling services should be provided. Well, that might be true, but I don't think that really has anything to do with what this is saying, right? Lottery funds allow schools to purchase equipment and supplies that are necessary. So this is actually a positive of lottery funds with education. And based on what's up here, I feel like the author's trying to say the opposite. So I don't think that's the answer. Using money from state lotteries to fund education is a mistake. That's a good possibility there. I'm going to keep C in mind. State lotteries are great generators of revenue. Well, no, again, that's a positive, and I think based on everything that they're saying here, C is the best answer because they're trying to say it's a mistake to use state lotteries to fund education. Which sentence gives the best example of formal language? Sometimes these are a little bit tricky because more than one could be an acceptable answer, but they want you to pick the best example. So let's read through our options. It's totally unacceptable that the county's emergency plan is outdated. I do remember from my guidelines for formal language that it shouldn't have contractions, so maybe this one's out. B, the county's handling of the chemical spill raised serious concerns. To me, that one sounds okay, but then again, with these, sometimes more than one can sound okay. So let's just remember B. C, the county totally messed up the cleanup of the chemical spill. Messed up is a little bit, it's not really formal in my mind, so I'm thinking maybe that's not the best use of language here. So I'm going to try D. I can't believe the county botched the cleanup of the chemical spill. Again, the word botched to me does not sound the most formal. So I'm thinking the best example would be B. I hope you've gotten something out of this presentation. If it helps, please go back and review slides, pausing them as you need to, taking some notes. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to call or email us. And we wish you the best of luck on the TABE.